All right. Again, so what I will do is first, the classification task force members. These are the 17 individuals from across our great state that got together over the course of many meetings and many hours to come up with this proposal. As you can see, all the names there that come from all across the state. I can leave that up there for a moment. So the first thing that we wanted to cover was to show you how we currently do our classification. So in football's a little bit different than our other sports. That was as of last year. Last year was the first year for the new metro, suburban, and rural setup. This is our second year of that setup. And essentially, the metro is the 8 most populated counties in the state of Florida make up the metro. And then the 59 other counties make up suburban. And then the rural schools currently have to have less than 600 students, and they have to be in the rural economic development, have to be registered or have to be recognized by REDI as being rural. And they would qualify for that division in football as well. That goes for the other sports that have rural as well. In the other sports, in our major team sports, baseball, softball, soccer, basketball, girls volleyball, right now, and including all of our individual sports and other, it is done via student enrollment only. Each sport does have a different number of classifications based upon how many teams declare and participate in that sport. So for example, soccer has 6 classifications currently, 2A through 7A. They do not have a rural division, whereas volleyball, baseball, softball, basketball all have a rural, so they are 1A through 7A and have 7 classifications. Currently, rural in our team sports is referred to as 1A. That is our rural division. In our other smaller team sports, they have upwards of 2 or 3 classifications, sometimes 1 classification, and then our individual sports have up to 4. They're allowed to have up to 4 classifications in those individual sports. Once a determination has been made on how many teams are participating in a particular sport, we use a map to then use geography to divide into regions and districts to the best of our ability, trying as best as possible to divide them evenly, taking into account obviously travel, distances. Sometimes it's easier said than done in certain areas of the state, but we do our best under the current model to spread them out as evenly as possible and get as many teams in the same area as we can, based upon, again, how many teams happen to be there in that certain classification based on their school size. In each of these classifications, the numbers that each class may, or excuse me, in each sport that each classification may have is determined by how many teams in the distance. So from 601 to 1700, maybe one class, or 600 to 1200 in a different sport. It's not all consistent right now on how that's broken down, because it matters about how many teams are participating in each sport. So that is sort of a quick rundown of how we currently are doing our classifications. So the new structure would only affect team sports. So this new proposal that I'm going to go through here is only going to affect team sports. Individual sport classification would remain the same. And the reason behind that is because the rankings are a huge part of the new proposal. So ranking system, in whatever fashion that may be, when all is said and done, is again a big backbone of the new proposal. And individual sports do not use the same MaxPrep, FHSAA power rankings, and so currently the plan is to leave those the same for now, and continue to evaluate how we can possibly include individual sports at another time per the task force. Classification for team sports would still be determined by school enrollment. It would be the same process, and I'll get into a little bit more here with this next slide. There are some differences. So they will still be determined by school enrollment. However, the sports you see listed there, baseball, boys and girls basketball, football, boys and girls soccer, girls volleyball, and softball will be classified into 8 classifications. Rural is no longer referred to as 1A. Rural is rural. And then you would have 1A through 7A. One caveat with that is rural. In order for a rural division to exist in said sport, there must be 24 schools that participate. Under the current proposal, rural would be the rural cutoff. So currently it's at 600 students. The rural cutoff would be determined by football. So we would take a number of teams in football, and then that top enrollment number of the highest enrolled school in football would be the cutoff for the other sports. So we would still have the 32, I believe, is that correct? Yes, 32 teams in rural, with 24 making the playoffs still. In the other sports, that number of rural teams could be more than 32. It would be based upon the number of the highest enrolled school in rural. So that could be 588, it could be 550, it could be 600, it could be somewhere in there. And that is what we'll base the other sports off of, would be off of football's numbers. The sports you see there, boys and girls lacrosse, boys and girls water polo, beach volleyball, boys volleyball, and flag football will be divided into classifications based upon their size. Currently, lacrosse has 2, water polo has 1, flag football has 2, and beach volleyball has 1. A couple of those may be expanding. We've had a lot of interest in some of those sports in terms of growth. They are exploding, flag football being one, beach volleyball being another, that we could see added classifications based upon the number of teams, which is a great thing. And so those numbers could change, but we do not have enough teams in those sports currently to have 8 classifications, 1A through 7A plus rural. So these sports would be handled a little bit differently in terms of how they are classified and structured. So this is getting into football a little bit more specifically, because there are some changes to football with this proposal. With this proposal, the sport of football would no longer require mandatory district competition at any of the classification levels during the regular season. Currently, rural does not have districts. They actually don't have districts, so there's no required district play. We would still keep districts in the other classifications. Rural would stay the same under this proposal with no districts based upon the number of teams and the distance between the teams. Districts are a little bit harder to create where the travel distance is reasonable. But in 1A through 7A, we would still have districts. There would just no longer be mandatory district play. Those teams could absolutely play each other should they choose to schedule each other, but they would not be mandated as they currently are to play that district schedule. All schools that participate in the football state series would schedule 9 regular season games. Currently, they are able to schedule 10. This would allow for 9. With all schools required to leave week 11 vacant with no game. So no team should have a game scheduled on week 11. That is the week that we will have our district championship weeks. They will occur on week 11. After week 9, the FHSAA power rankings would be used to determine the top 2 ranked teams in each district. So if there's 5 teams in a district and the top 2 teams are ranked number 10 and number 12 overall, and the other 3 teams are all under that, that number 10 and number 12 team would play, and the number 12 team would travel and play at the number 10 team. The winning team would receive an automatic bid into the state playoffs, the regional round of the playoffs. The remaining teams after week 9, after those 2 district teams are determined by the rankings, every other team in the state then has the opportunity to schedule a week 11 game to fill out their 10-game schedule. The 10-game maximum regular season will not change. The change will be in the initial 9 regularly scheduled games. And the reason for that is if a team schedules 10 and then ends up playing in that district champion, it would put them over the maximum number of contests, which would then create an issue with the rankings and with policy. And that's that last line down there talks about that 10th game in week 11. I apologize if that's blocking out some of it. Now we're going to discuss the open division. This was a big, this would be probably the biggest change to the current classification. There are some other states that do something similar to this. And what this would do is would create a division that would consist of the top ranked teams in each sport competing in their own bracket. So every team will still be classified at the beginning of a classification cycle. Currently, the classification cycle is every 2 years. That would stay the same under this proposal, so it'd still be a 2-year classification cycle. And each year, those teams, or excuse me, every 2 years, if let's say a school is put into 4A for a particular sport, and they finish in the top 32, 16, or 8. You can see at the bottom, each sport will be divided out in the number of teams under this proposal that will be in the open division. They would then be pulled out of the 4A, 5A, 6A rural. It's open to any qualifying team that qualifies via the rankings to play in the open division. They would then be moved into that open division, which would create a 9th playoff bracket for each sport. And those teams would then compete in their own championship outside. So they would not compete in both. That is a question we've had. Would they be in both? No, they would not. They would be removed from their 4A, 5A, rural, 1A, whatever they happen to be in, and moved into that open division and compete against teams from across the state, from across different classification levels, with the idea being that those are the top teams that season. And now they have an opportunity to be the top team in the state of Florida, having won that, winning this open division. And again, down at the bottom, obviously, if there's only one classification, such as water polo, there's not enough teams to have 32 or even 16. So there would be the top 8 teams in the power rankings would be pulled into the open division. If there's 3 to 4 classes, it would be 16. And currently, what the current proposal reads is 5 to 8 classes, which would be the rest of the major team sports, would be a 32-team open division bracket. I wanted to just show here, I have a couple different sports. This is from 2 years ago, 21-22. These were the final boys basketball rankings. So you can see there was a spread. There was teams from 2A all the way to 7A that qualified. Those are the teams that would have been in the bracket, and you can see 1 would have played 32 theoretically under the current proposal, 2 would play 31, 3, 30, and so on, structured through a regular bracket with the higher seed hosting in those instances. Another question we've received is if those teams are the district champion and they're pulled into the open division, it does not leave a vacant spot in the 4A or 3A bracket. What that does is the next highest ranked team per that region would then be pulled into the 8th spot in that region for the playoffs. And again, whether that's 3A, 4A, 5A, 6A, etc. This is another example. This was the final girls soccer rankings from 21-22. So you can see again a widespread 2A all the way to 7A. Would be involved in this, and there was no 1A in soccer, but you can see that the spread from across the state would be participating in that. Some concerns that we heard. I wanted to go ahead and just put these out there. These are some concerns for the board to consider. We've heard some concerns that they believe 32 is too many in the open division. The task force believes that 32, and we actually had some more discussion at it at another meeting, and they decided that they want to stick with 32 for those larger team sports because it will capture all of the best teams in the state and allow all of them to participate for that open championship. Taking it down to 16, they don't believe would necessarily, if a team is really good, if the rankings don't shake out, they think 32 would definitely capture all of the top teams, whereas 16 in those larger team sports may not. But that is a concern. We've heard some people that 32 is too many, that the teams at the bottom wouldn't have as much of a chance. And them looking at the top 32, they felt like there was a powerhouse of really good teams throughout the top 32 rankings, and that gave them the confidence to go with that number in those larger team sports. Another concern we've had are about the rankings. Are the rankings accurate enough? There are some differences between the FHSA Power Rankings and the MaxPreps rankings. The main difference that we are aware of is the margin of victory. MaxPreps does take margin of victory into account. Margin of victory is something that has been discussed at our sport committee meetings over the last year. And most of our, not all, but most of our sports are in favor of some sort of margin of victory. Two sports that from the meeting were baseball and softball. They did not believe a margin of victory component should be included. The rest of the major team sports that could have a margin of victory thought that, and they've even given us numbers. For example, football was working off of 17, soccer 4, lacrosse 6. So basically cap that number so that they're not encouraging unsportsmanlike blowouts and teams to just run the score up, which was a concern from some members of the previous board, that they wanted to make sure that sportsmanship was still being hung on to with this. And so that was removed. However, for the accuracy of the rankings and the importance of the rankings with this, we have had some feedback from some people that they would like to see that. And so again, that has been discussed, and that's some information that we can provide absolutely in detail at the November board meeting should the board choose, and we can bring that information as well. The third concern we've heard are the travel concerns from the open division. If you saw, and I can even bring this back up, if you see some of these, American Heritage Plantation in the first round will be traveling to Bartram Trail. That's quite a hike for a first round game. Now, some people have said, hey, it's the open division. This is something that travel is going to be a part of it. However, we want to make sure we are being cognizant and being sensitive to the issues of the schools and taking that into account. There's been some thoughts of a North and South division and then combining them at some point, reseeding. There's been some ideas that have been floated by some individuals, some members that have expressed the concerns with the travel, especially for the first couple rounds. So I just wanted to make sure we brought that to the attention of the board as well. I want to make sure we were upfront with it and getting that out, getting out in front of it, I should say, before the November meeting and any other subsequent discussion that may occur. That is it from my end. Myself and Mr. Harrison are happy to take any questions that the board may have.